basically our effective tax rate, and for those of you that are in finance, it's kind of like the bond market. Interest rates go up, bond prices go down, bond prices go up, interest rates go down. It's that type of thing. How your effective rate gets treated with existing properties or new properties on the tax rate. So our effective tax rate now, remember, published tax rate is 24 cents per hundred. Our effective tax rate is 22.61 cents. The other provision in the property tax code says that cities can raise property taxes without going to the voters, currently at 8%. So we can raise property taxes 8%, not have to go to the voters and say, sorry, here it is, we need the additional revenue for it. Okay? And the citizens of Tyler really just simply don't have a voice. It's something that we can pass without citizens approval. But that 8% that we can raise this year is based on the effective rate. So our published rate is 24 cents per hundred. Our rollback rate before we have to go before the voters is only 24.42 cents. And so we'll talk about real quick, what does a penny mean in property tax revenue? A penny, up or down, means about $750,000 with the new 2018 standard. 1% movement in the sales tax rates, about $280,000. So that being said, you kind of have an idea about what's going on with the property tax rate and how it affects your tax bill at the end of the day and the revenue for the city. Can we go ahead?
Yep.
Now what we've got here, these numbers are going to be really small. Basically, Al and his staff put together a comparison of Texas cities' approximate size to Tyler and showed the tax rate. Tyler by far is the lowest tax rate in the city, and in many cases you could double our tax rate, our property tax rate, and we'd still be lower than most cities in the state of Texas. Now this graph right here shows that basically in this year, this fiscal year, 17-18, you're going to see $1 million surplus. That $1 million surplus, which you don't see the explanation behind, is because Councilman Sellers, being the expert in the room, owning her own insurance agency, found some savings in our insurance plan, specifically in the prescription drug payment. Now in this next year, this is the next budget year, 18-19, with everything the same, with the current trends that we have going on, but without that $1 million, that one-time $1 million that was found in the healthcare plan, now we're projecting a 1.6 million deficit. And so, folks, that's $2.6 million. So think about what a penny impacts, how much revenue it generates. A penny generates about $750,000. So with $1.6 million, you're talking 2 pennies right off the bat that you'd need to just to cover this. Now, if I ever, and you'll see another graph in a minute that will show the next 3 years actually is projected in the deficit. If I told my wife that, honey, guess what, we're going to start a business, and we're going to run 3 years in a red, but I promise you that 4th year we're going to be positive, she'd hit me in the head with a mallet. There's no doubt about it. So this is the real serious number right here that we need to focus on. This is revenues by type. You can see that sales tax is the tall graph, property tax is next. To give you an idea of the percentages, 43% of our revenue is sales tax. That's the most volatile revenue that you could possibly have. Consumer confidence is high, and it's high right now. Sales tax continues to decline. Consumer confidence is low, sales tax drops, and the city's in big crisis like we have been for the last 2 years. Then you see property tax. Property tax basically levels out the bumps in the revenue road. And then you can see where fines and penalties and then some other revenue. And they stay very constant across the way. You can see by the graph that, if nothing else, you can tell that there's a projection of increased sales tax in the next few years. Now, the property tax is projected to increase at a rate of 3.8%. We'll talk about that here in just a minute also, too. All right, the next one. Now you've got expenditures by category for the city. We're all about public safety. That's what we're chartered to do. Fire and police, they're by far the best investment, the number one investment that the city makes. And then you get into, and that makes up 68% of the budget. General government's 13%. It's the very next line. You can see that all the graphs are fairly straight line right across the board. Public services are at 9%, recreation and culture 8%, municipal court 2%. And so basically you don't see much movement, which is a good thing. Now, because the city continues to grow, we still have pressures to add fire and policemen because we're going to build 2 new fire stations. We need to staff up for police also too because the areas we've annexed and so on. Understand that for each fireman and each policeman that we hire today, they won't be in a car by themselves and they won't be in a truck for 18 months because you've got that training curve that we have before they can actually be a main contributor to either of the 2 forces. Okay, sir. This is the SCAD property values right here. And I want to make one point. We're not going to talk about this peak right here, but for the last 4 years, that you can see that we've had an average growth of 3.8%. That really says a lot about our community. It says a lot about our local economy, how diverse it is. Property values have really held their own. What this peak is 2 things. It's 2 businesses. It's predominantly Ardent, the UT Health Ardent merger, ETMC, and then the other is the increased valuation that Della had received from SCAD also too. I will tell you that, and this is why these are not figured in the averages for property valuation increases. This also, both of those 2 companies that I just made reference to are contesting their valuation. And I understand that Della might have reached a settlement. I'm not for sure. But I have not heard whether Ardent's received one yet or not. It'll probably be contingent upon what happens with the Della settlement. Okay, sir. This is our property tax rate. From 93-94, you can see that we had roughly a 54 cent per 100 tax rate, and a little over 16.5 cents was debt, general obligation bond debt. Along comes Kevin Eltine, before he was mayor and senator and as a city councilman, and he said, hey, look, the state of Texas just passed a law that said that we can apply for have some sales tax, put it on the ballot, and use it for either infrastructure or use it for economic development. We chose to use it for infrastructure, but also to pay off our general obligation bond debt. The vision behind this was absolutely brilliant when you think about it. I mean, when you're able to basically have a use tax that on anyone that came into the area to help pay off our general obligation bond debt, and then allow the city leadership to evaluate just exactly what level, what rate our property tax need to be at. It was a great concept, a great idea. And then as successive mayors came in and they paid off more debt, they also continued to address and lower the property tax rate. That carried us down all the way to 19 cents, a little over 19 cents per 100. Needless to say, that's the problem, because we started so low, even though it was quite some time ago. It's created the problem to catch up, because you can only raise your property tax without going to the voters 8%. And there has not been an effort to raise the rollback rate each year, which would give you the compound effect that would help us get where we need to be. And the city manager himself said that 30 cents is the magic number. Honorable Kevin Eltine, which is now trustee at UT, said that he never intended for the rate to go below 32. And he had had conversations before. So there was a plan to keep it right around 32 cents and then not have any general obligation bond debt. That would have allowed the city to continue to pay cash for infrastructure needs, to be able to have a handle on infrastructure repairs, participate in other development projects to revitalize areas such as downtown and so on. So we've slowly made progress on this, but just very slow. Mayor Hines has raised property taxes a nickel since he's been in office. It's been a situation where last time we used a portion of the penny that he raised. He did not go up to the rollback rate. We used a portion of the penny and put it to seal coats and overlays also to the city for street repair. So you're probably seeing some of those activities happen in and around your city. But this is still the issue, the 24.42 cents. The city manager even said, like I had just mentioned, that 30 cents is the magic number. How we've been able to survive from this point back here all the way until now, we covered quite a span of time, is the fact that the city managers historically have drawn down all of those fund balances in the different funds and basically brought Peter to pay Paul. That's what it amounts to. So as we cash flowed, what we cash flowed in good times when sales tax was up, we were able to draw less from those funds, but basically it just extended the life that each of those funds had. Now, one real quick thing to note is that the EPA consent decree, there's been some misconception that may even be in this room what that entails. Basically, we got in trouble with the EPA over wastewater lines and breaks in those lines. So sewage spills is what it amounts to. Our wastewater infrastructure is just deteriorating to the point. It's like any other city in America. 75 to 100 years old, those lines are going to break. A lot of them are plate pipe and so on. So it's time, and Mayor Hines made a commitment to fix that infrastructure. Now, how we're paying for that, and there was an article in the paper, and the different media have written stories and reported on it also too, is there's going to be we're selling bonds, and that bond debt is revenue bond debt. It's not general obligation bond debt, but that's revenue bond debt that's going to be serviced by your water bill, basically. So, water your yard, water your lawn. It's helping us pay for the infrastructure repairs, for the wastewater treatment, the wastewater plants throughout the city. It does not necessarily include any improvements that need to happen with the wastewater treatment plant. And we'll talk about that if there's any questions about the West Side development and any expansion plans in the wastewater. Mayor also said that the other things that are not free that we're going to have to address also too, that's not going to be covered with the general fund, it'll be covered under water bond debt also too, is replacement of water lines. And some of the older parts of town, whether it's the Azalea district or the areas right across Gentry, House, and so on, that area, will be the recipients of the first round of repairs and infrastructure because it's the oldest infrastructure in the city. So not only will we be repairing the wastewater lines, but there'll probably be some freshwater lines also too. Now that stuff's expensive. Consider a freshwater line, 2-inch line, 1-inch line. It's $1 million a mile, and there's over 300 miles of water line subgrade in the city of Tyler currently. So you can see this is going to be expensive, but it is going to be taken care of and repaired, and the bond debt's going to be serviced by revenue from the water department. So moving forward, the legislature is under the direction of the governor. You're going to say, Bob, how is this all going to happen? Well, anytime politics is involved, you have to watch your heart. You've got to make sure that protect your interest. And right now, the legislature is seeing, or what they feel is, runaway tax debt from cities all across the state of Texas. When you take a look around the state of Texas, we're really the only city that's been fiscally responsible. We have no general obligation bond debt. We do have some water bond revenue debt, but we have no general obligation bond debt. We pay cash for our goods and services. We have some sales tax now that's no longer needed to service bond debt. And so we're being basically penalized because we kept our house. We've been good stewards with taxpayers' dollar. And so what they're proposing to do is the governor's asking the new legislature that will convene in January of 2019 to consider a new rollback rate of 4%. who's going to cut the cap in half. For a city like us, it absolutely, it hurts. Let's be realistic. I won't say it cripples, because we'll always find a way to get out of it. And right now, the reason that I'm sharing this information with you and other groups is we may have to make that tough decision and say that we may have to go to the voters and say, what would you like for us to pay for? What would you like for us to do? So if that goes to 4%, it's going to take 30 years at the current rollback rate this year and future rollback rates at 4% cap. It'll take 30 years for us to get to 30 cents. We can't wait 30 years to get to 30 cents because by the time over the next 10 years, we'll probably be looking to have to get to 35 to 38 cents in order to maintain goods and services and handle the expansion of the city. Now you're going to see here, this is the proposed budget, but this is the multi-year budget. This is this year. You're seeing the green line is up above the expenses, so you're seeing that $1 million revenue. This is the $1.6 million shortfall in 2019. It's about $1 million to $1.3 million in 2020. 2021, it comes closer to break even, but we're still talking over $2 million. And who can project out that far anyhow when it comes to consumer confidence with sales tax? Now let's talk about some facts, some bullet point facts. The city of Tyler has an annual budget of approximately $70 million. Each penny, like I had mentioned earlier, generates about $750,000. Every percent in sales tax revenue is $280. The half-cent sales tax that we use for capital improvement projects, for which Dr. Sharp is the appointee out of my district. He sits on that board. They manage about $13 million a year. Actually, $10 million because $3 million comes right off the top for street improvements and overlays and that type of thing. And then there's a list of about 220 projects, of which only the top 10 really get serious consideration because that's all the money there is. And it's our policy to pay cash for our infrastructure. So 13 through 220, unless something drastic happens, an emergency of some sort, it's going to be anywhere from 10 to 30 years before those subsequent projects are put on, that moved up the list. As I said earlier, there's nearly a zero fund balance. There's no more rabbits in the hat. Now, I wasn't trying to make it funny, but it was how the city manager ended his first strategic planning session with us in September. So he ended his presentation with a magician turning the top hat over and said, there's no more rabbits in the hat. And it was very powerful. I mean, basically all of the funds have been drawn down to where there's minimal funds anywhere, and we have to rely on grants. 40% of our police force is eligible for retirement today. Now, not that they've all turned in their retirement notices, but there's a benefit to that. But then the other side that you have to think about, if you're in a business, if you've got 40% of your workforce that's eligible to retire and then go seek a second career, it's got to be a threat to you. So our 2018-19 forecast is 3.8% increase in property values, a minimal increase in sales tax revenue. It's still showing more aggressive than I think that we probably should show. So basically, our budget constraints, as I mentioned just a minute ago, haven't allowed us to really think for the city. To come up with the idea of ways the city could lead, say on this entry corridor into downtown, to support downtown development. Okay, this is really important, and I saved the best for last. There are two key dates. The tax rate will actually be voted on September 12th at council meeting. But the two public hearings prior to that, especially the very first, which occurs on August the 8th. Whatever your vision is for the city of Tyler, it could be a park interest, it could be a street infrastructure interest, it could be a development interest, whatever it is, after seeing this and the information, the supplemental information that you're going to get, the city's broke. The city doesn't have the money to get out and be proactive in a lot of the areas of which you may have an interest in. So on August the 8th, we're basically going to have our first public hearing. And at that hearing, we'll establish the ceiling for the discussion that we can have on where the tax rate's going to fall. So you're going to hear me propose a tax rate for consideration, a nickel over the published tax rate. Now you go, oh my God, Bob, you've lost your mind. You're going to pass a tax rate of 29 cents per 100? No. This first meeting, we can't establish the tax rate until September the 12th. But we can't even have a conversation if we don't have the rate high enough to be able to have a conversation in the 20s. Right now, our current rate is really 22.61. So if we need 3 more pennies, we can't even have the discussion if we approve a rollback rate of 24.42 cents, because that's only 1.5 cents over the effective rate. You see where I'm coming from? So what you're going to hear is, or what my ask is of you this evening, is if you see the sense of urgency like I do, then I would hope that you would come to City Council, fill out a card, and then express some interest in why. Nobody wants to pay more taxes. Nobody wants to pay more taxes, but when it holds the city back from development, from considering projects like, who has seen the Fitzpatrick vision in the city?